Welcome to the BizDad Podcast, where we dive into the melding of fathership and entrepreneurship with your host, the original BizDad himself, Adam Labar. Adam is a Christian, a former Air Force officer, a dad to 3 amazing kids, a coach, a real estate investor, and a business owner. On this podcast, he'll explore the unique journeys of amazing dads who are striving for greatness in both business and family. So whether you're a dad who is an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a man striving to be a better dad, get ready as the BizDad brings you conversations to inspire, challenge, and equip you to be a better dad and entrepreneur. And now, here's Adam.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad Podcast. Today, I am stoked to talk to Jeremy Dyer. Jeremy was referred over here by Todd Dexheimer, which was an awesome podcast. Go back and listen to the podcast I had with Todd. It'll be great. Jeremy, I would love to get to know you a bit more and introduce you to the group here. So if you can, introduce yourself, tell us about your family, and tell us about your business.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And thanks so much for having me on. Really looking forward to talking with your audience today. So again, as Adam mentioned, Jeremy Dyer. I really grew up in the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I grew up in a lower income, demographic neighborhood. My parents, unfortunately, got divorced when I was 6. I had a couple of siblings. I was really kind of a byproduct of the 90s. I was a latchkey kid. For those that aren't familiar with that term, I was a latchkey kid at the young age of 8 years old, which basically means that I got myself up for school every day. I came home to an empty house after school, and really the summers I was left up to my own devices. Why? Because my parents were divorced. My mother was working full time, and I really kind of ruled the roost, so to speak, in the neighborhood that I lived. By the 4th grade, I had severe ADHD, and I had so many check marks next to my name on the chalkboard that I didn't have enough time left in the school year to fully serve out all of my detentions. And so really had a really kind of struggling youth, growing up. And I think it was just a byproduct of the fact that there was some chaos, there was some confusion, in my life, and that kind of navigated me towards wanting to seek attention from others through making some poor decisions. Thankfully, when I got into high school, I really kind of found my passion, my mission, my purpose, and that was really centered around being a part of an organization called DECA, which is a sales and marketing club, where I could really use my ability to communicate, my ability to authentically and genuinely connect with others and network with others to really find kind of what my future profession, would look like. I always kind of live by the motto that we all need to have a work to do. We need to have a will to obey. We need a woman to love, and we need to, have something to live for that's greater than ourselves. And that was really my work to do, is really what I found out, what I wanted to do early on in high school. It was also during that time, Adam, that I met Jesus. Okay. So I, really grew up, prior to that, with what I would call it a Catholic background, which really for me simply meant that we were holiday churchgoers, right? So you'd find me in church on Easter morning, maybe Christmas Eve, and outside of that, it was really centered around weddings and funerals. And so I, really at that kind of time when I was later in my high school years, I remember, being exposed to other families that were part of a church community that I was not previously a part of. And there was something that was different with those families that I really desired to know more about. And that was the relationship, not only with each other and how they interacted with each other in kind of what I would call a loving way, but also more about this relationship that they had, with our creator and our designer. And so it was really during that time, Adam, where I was kind of forced with this 2 ways to live. Am I going to continue to live with the crown of thorns on my own head, or am I going to put that crown of thorns, on Jesus's head and let him be the guiding principle and the rock in my life? And so when I transitioned into college, Adam, I really traded that kind of college fraternity life for what I would call men's fraternity at our church. I really traded that rush week for youth ministry and missions and mentoring, others. I traded really college life, right, for things like Worldview Weekend, and learning service and surrender and pruning, right? And so then after college, I really transitioned then into my working career. I met my girlfriend right after I had graduated from high school, and we basically dated for 5 years, before we got married. But once I kind of ended, my college career, I launched into what I would call my ADP career, which was a life of service to the company for almost 25 years. I recently retired from technology sales. But I was blessed at ADP to be the number one guy in the company for 20 out of 25 years out of over 6,000 colleagues in North America. So very blessed to have, such a great run professionally speaking. I was higher income, which certainly comes with its price of other challenges as well. But I was virtually debt-free by the time I was 24 years of age.
Wow.
We had built our dream home, completely paid off, the same house that I live in today, 2 decades later. Had the 40-foot RV sitting in the driveway. Life was good, was able to max out the 401k, by the time March or April rolled around each year. I was crushing it at work, but at the same time, I also had to come to the conclusion that I don't want my life to just all be completely wrapped up in my career. I consider myself to be somewhat of an achievement addict. I think if I was going to write another second book, I would probably call it Achievement Addict. So I was winning at work. I had peak performance, winning awards, crushing goals. I had all this outward success, but inwardly, I had a lot of restlessness. And so I was winning at work, but at the time, really recognizing that I was losing, spiritually. If you might remember the song, I think it's by Mark Hall, American Dream. In the song, and it's Casting Crowns for those that aren't familiar with Mark Hall, right? In the song, Mark Hall tells the story about this man who is chasing worldly success at the expense of his faith and his family. And in the song, I'm not much of a artist, by the way, so you're not going to see me in the church choir on Sunday morning. But he specifically talks about this man who works with his hands, and he's building this castle with his two hands in sand, and he's pouring all he has into this castle that is built on sand. And he basically comes to the conclusion and says, "I would much rather, have a shack on a rock than a castle in the sand." And so that for me was really this kind of shift in my life from, living a life of success to rather living a life of significance, and really realigning my priorities and centering my life around really my faith and my ultimate legacy. So we've got a couple of kids now. I kind of brought you up to the early married, years. I started marathon running. Again, I'm an achievement addict. So I started marathon running when my firstborn was born, and ran 20 marathons. That took its toll on the body. So I retired from that sport a few years ago. We also, at that time, when I had 2 younger kids, decided to start fixing and flipping houses. We started wholesaling houses. My dad was a general contractor at the time. This is back in 2015. This is back during the global financial crisis, okay, where we could buy houses for $90,000 a door. We could stick $20K into improvements, and we could sell the house for $250,000. Well, at the time, again, high income earner, dad who was a general contractor. My wife stepped off the W-2 bandwagon very early when our first child was born, so she had some extra time, to really pour into, design improvements, the administrative, side of the business. So we start fixing and flipping houses, and that was going really well, of course, because where we were at in the market cycle, you almost couldn't fail at it, right? Mm-hmm. But the challenge for us, Adam, is in 2015, we doubled down on children, okay? So in 2015, we decided, and this is another story which I want you to ask me about later, okay. But in 2015, we decided to adopt children from Wuhan, China. So we're going to come back to that a little bit later here, but it was really during that time where I had to make this pivotal decision. Do I continue to ride 2 horses at the same time? Horse number 1, technology sales job. Horse number 2, continue to build up this really side hustle, fix and flip business that was going really well. And really, honestly, horse number 3, now I'm a father of 4 kids, right? My older boys, they want me to be coaching their hockey teams and their baseball teams and football and lacrosse and all the different activities that they're in. And honestly, I just ran out of bandwidth, right? I had no further bandwidth. And I'll never forget, my wife and I were in Wuhan, China on Gotcha Day. And I get a phone call from my listing agent that said, hey, Jeremy, that house that you've got on the market that you've, fixed up and renovated, the septic report for the well and the septic came back as failed. And so for the low price of $35,000 to replace the well and septic and all the landscaping that went along with it, I turned to my wife and I said, we're now paying ourselves minimum wage. We spent 6 months, a labor of love, pouring our heart, and our soul into this, fix and flip. And so it was really at that time, Adam, where I had to make that difficult decision to pivot out of that business, focus on the family, focus on, my one horse, my ADP job, my technology sales job. And I started passive investing instead. So we continued to keep the money deployed in real estate. I just wasn't the active owner operator any longer. So we start passive investing in multifamily real estate syndications. My wife and I have invested in over 60 of those different projects over the course of the last, 10 years now. Also at that time, I decided, you know what, I've really got to start to get involved in my kids, lives more. We decided to start homeschooling, which is another story we can unpack a little bit later. I also decided to not just show up to my kids' sporting activities and drop them off at the local field and go hang out with the other dads and drink beer. Instead, I decided I'm going to be coaching these teams. So rather than being kind of the professional Uber driver, I decided to step into the ring, with the kids, and have really coached probably 35 different hockey teams over the course of the last, decade, and have had a lot of experience working with kids in that capacity, which obviously puts me in the same room as my own children are, but it also allows me to be able to influence really their friends. And the other kids, now that they're all kind of teenagers, they kind of joke with me that I'm not the X's and the O's coach, I'm the mental mindset coach. So I've kind of found my purpose or my calling, inside the locker room in that regard. Then another thing, I'll just kind of keep rambling here and we'll kind of get
Go
to the
for it.
closure.
Ramble away.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So if you remember, I had mentioned that we pivoted to passive real estate investing back in 2015 because we doubled down on kids and we got involved in investing, outside of Wall Street, and I would call it more into Main Street type investing. So we start deploying capital with all these different operators, all these different asset classes, whether it's, multifamily to self-storage, assisted living, flex office, industrial, boat marinas, RV parks. I mean, you name it, right? We just got involved in learning about investing in alternatives outside of Wall Street, right? And more into Main Street type investing. So we were doing that for, a decade-long period. And all of a sudden, a lot of my friends, colleagues, neighbors, people we go to church with, they're wanting to learn more about what we're investing in because all they know is what their financial advisor is telling them to do, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas we're not listening to the advice of the financial advisors, we're actually kind of creating our own investment, vehicles and investing in hard assets, things that cash flow, things that have tax benefits associated with them. So we started a company, my wife and I did, kind of fell into it. We started a company called Starting Point Capital, which is just an education platform to educate others on the benefits of passive real estate investing. We don't monetize it. At the time, we did not monetize it. It was just more of an education platform to make it easy for people to learn more. I wrote a book called The Fundamental Investor, again, to further people's education. But what was crazy, Adam, is we start this company, Starting Point Capital, and people in hundreds are coming out of the woodwork wanting to know more about where we're deploying our investment dollars, okay? Where we're investing into communities, into people, into impact type vehicles. And my wife and I, in just a 3-year period, have almost raised $100 million.
Wow.
So almost 9 figures of capital has now been deployed into these types of investments that we were already investing into for the last 10 years, right? Again, your multifamily, your self-storage, your assisted living, those types of properties and projects. And so really, I had to come to the conclusion again, because remember, now I'm riding 2 horses again. I've got the tech sales job and I've got Starting Point Capital, and we've largely scratched that entrepreneurial itch in helping support people, with changing the way that they think about investing. So I had to make the difficult decision 1 year ago, almost to date, 1 year ago today, I exited that 25-year career in technology sales, and my colleagues thought I had 3 eyeballs. Okay. They're like, Jeremy, you are leaving the best thing. You're the number one guy in the company. You're a glorified order taker at this point. You're hardly having to grind after the next commission check or bonus check. The money's just flowing into you, right? And so I had to make the really difficult decision to not chase after that commission check or that bonus check and dedicate 40, 50, 60 hours of my life to technology sales. So I stepped off of that hamster wheel, so to speak, and we went all in, with Starting Point Capital. So I'm the founder and CEO of Starting Point Capital, which again is purely an education platform to help others learn more about passive real estate investing. I also, like you, host a podcast called the On the Rise podcast. Previously, it was called the Freedom Point podcast, but too many people were thinking that the Freedom Point had something to do with not what I was actually talking about. So we pivoted to the On the Rise podcast instead, and you can check it out where you podcast.
What's going on, everybody? I wanted to jump in and take a second to tell you about the awesome team over at Wise VAs. Oftentimes, as entrepreneurs, we can feel a bit overwhelmed with mundane tasks that eat up our valuable time, and it's time to reclaim that schedule, all right? It's time to stop doing some of those $10 an hour jobs and give them back to an elite group of talent that are there specifically to help you and help you stay in your zone of genius. So delegate those $10 an hour tasks to focus on more $1,000 an hour tasks. Reclaim what matters most in your life, which is your time. Get that amazing team of elite remote talent that is there to help support you and make sure that you are giving back the best to your company. So schedule a free strategy call at getwisevas.com/Adam. That is getwisevas.com/Adam. It is an amazing group, an amazing team. They do an awesome job with everything that they've got going on there. If you have some tasks on the side, whether it's administrative, whether it's editing, whether it's recording, whatever it is, they have got an assistant for you, someone who is going to be able to help you out and take some of those tasks off of your plate. I thank Wise VAs every day for helping me process all of these podcasts, helping me take care of a bunch of stuff in the background. And I definitely would recommend them over to you. So again, getwisevas.com/Adam. All right. Thanks a lot. Back to the show. Fantastic. Well, that made my life a lot easier because a lot of times I have to run back and say, okay, well, bring me up to speed on how you got to there. But I didn't have to do that with you at all. So this is great. But it did bring a whole lot of questions. I will rewind a little bit, though, and go back and start not really at the beginning. But 6 years old, your parents' divorce. Did you live mostly with your mom or mostly with your dad, or were you kind of split up between the two?
Yeah, I was split up between the two. Thankfully, neither of my parents abandoned me through the divorce. I was still involved. My father was still involved in my life. I got to see him, every Wednesday night and every other weekend. And sometimes it was elongated around, holiday time. But primarily, I grew up with my mother, being more the authoritarian, in my life. Whereas my father was more the fun guy, right? Because he also only saw me. Sometimes he would go a week without seeing me, right? And so when we had the opportunity to come together on a Wednesday evening or a weekend, it was almost always filled with fun, versus, him kind of, guiding me in some life principles, so to speak.
So as you were kind of growing up, did you realize that, or did you feel like, and forgive me if this phrase is not accurate, but almost like the absence of that strong father because it was just the friendship side of the house? Did you kind of see the effects of that as you were growing up?
100%. And then, that obviously, as I mentioned before, fourth grade year was the bottom for me, right? That was the market cycle bottom. And a lot of that's just simply because I would say I did not have, that father figure, that authoritative, figure in my life, somebody that was calling me to be a better version of myself, somebody that, is a male and understands male tendencies and male things, right? Thankfully, though, Adam, shortly, after that fourth grade year, my mother did remarry, and my stepfather has been a cornerstone component in my life. Okay, nice. I have a great relationship with both my, biological father as well as my stepfather, and both of them really complemented, I would say, one another. In that regard, and really taught me, about masculinity, right? How to be a man, how to treat a woman, how to, manage your finances, right? How to conduct yourself in front of others, right? All those types of things were really, helpful for me growing up, having originally had kind of that partial absence of a father, right? When I was 6 years old.
Yeah, which I think is a critical thing that I look at a lot of things going on in the world right now, and I attribute the lack of attentive fathers to a lot of that. And sometimes, I mean, it's always the man's fault for not doing something, but society has pushed men to the side regardless and kind of made it look like, no, like the woman can do anything the man can do. And this is to take nothing away from the woman at all. But no, that's not true at all. Having a steady, especially biblically based father standing in the house and showing especially those boys what to do. And don't get me wrong, the girls are going to get just as lost without a present father as well. But it is a long-lasting problem that we're seeing all the way through to today in our 40-year-old boys that walk around because they have yet to turn into men, and it baffles my mind. But I'm very thankful to hear that you had a stepfather come in and be present and help, because that is not always the case when that happens. And then you ended up with two father figures, so that works out. I'm interested to hear kind of how you said that when you got to high school is when you got your faith in Jesus and went from the CEO Christian, the Christmas and Easter only Christian, to actually like following Christ and learning about it. How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was invited to attend a church with a woman that I had interest in. That woman has now been my wife for almost 25 years.
Very good.
Yeah, we started hanging out when we were, juniors in high school. So she was also a part of this DECA organization that I talked about before. I happened to be the president of the organization, in high school at the time. And so we both had an interest in one another. And it's really she started to kind of introduce me to church by inviting me to youth group, on Wednesday nights. And we always talk about we always kind of joke that she wasn't, missionary dating me, so to speak, right? She just wanted to introduce me because she knew that I had a heart, right? And I would argue, I would say that I had faith in God previous to that. I didn't have a relationship. That was the big difference, right? And so I always believed that God existed. I believed, in, kind of God's plan and God's story of salvation, but I did not have a relationship with him, right? And that was kind of the big pivotal moment. But, when she started introducing me to individuals at church on Wednesday nights and on Sunday morning, right? Again, it was something that was different about them from what the world offered, right? And that was really, what attracted me, I would say, to want to learn more and desire to learn more about these individuals that had that authentic, genuine relationship with Jesus Christ, right? And so that really caught me to want to learn more, to dive in. So I remember early on as a Christian, I cranked through the Bible in a year because I just wanted to consume the information. Back in those days, there was Wow Worship CDs, right? I don't know if you remember Wow. I was a regular purchaser of the Wow Worship CDs. Also I commuted a lot in college. I didn't live on campus, and it was depending upon if it was a snow day or not, it could be a 30-minute commute. It could be a 90-minute commute. So I'd consume, the Bible on CD. I'd consume, Wow Worship, music. And early on during that time, I also decided to do missions work. So, when I was a sophomore and a junior in high school, I went to Mongolia for the entire summer, right? Rather than, my buddies, working full-time day jobs, doing landscaping or working at restaurants, I committed myself to going to Mongolia with our church, missions team to teach conversational English, in literally the end of the earth, right? Very few people have ever been to Mongolia, and I can tell you it is the ends of the earth.
For sure. Yeah. I've been to a lot of those terrible places that, terrible is the wrong word, but yeah, the end of the earth places. But I love that it struck you so strongly. I mean, I tell people all the time, I said the two best things you could possibly do is number one, follow Christ. Number two, marry a good woman, right? And obviously if I'm talking to a woman, I'll say marry a good man. You seem to have had that good woman bring you down the better path of following Christ. And that's one of the reasons I say to marry a good woman is they'll help keep you on that straight and narrow if they are the right woman, as opposed to pulling you away and taking you down paths you shouldn't be going. I love hearing that. And now you said you've been married 25 years, I think I heard you say?
Almost 25 years.
Almost 25 years.
We're on the doorstep.
All right. Yeah, my wife and I are right at 16 years, so we're a little bit behind you on that front. But I want to go through the adoption side because you had already had, it sounds like, two kids, and then you decided to adopt two kids. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in full clarity, so I've got four kids in total. I've got two biological boys, ages 19 and 17. And then I've got twins, Jet and Juliana, that are 13. And so they are my adopted children, which we can kind of unpack a little bit more, about what that story looks like here too.
For sure. Yeah, I would be very interested in that, especially, what that looked like through, I hear a lot of stories about it, post 9/11. I never really saw it in where I was. Folks who were Middle Eastern would get harassed constantly post 9/11. And then you look at COVID, there's a lot of, I don't, again, see it personally, but you hear the stories about a lot of push against Chinese or Asians as a whole. And your kids were from Wuhan, what a time for you to kind of go, oh yeah, I've actually been there, what a difference. What has it been like kind of, and I'm going to ask this selfishly as well, because my wife and I have been talking about adoption for a little while. What was it kind of like bringing two new folks into your life that's coming from a completely different country, different culture, obviously probably pretty small, I would imagine, so they didn't really know their country and culture, but man, oh man, what a world of change that was for you guys, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was. And if you don't mind, I'll maybe kind of hit the rewind button a little bit.
Yes.
And kind of bring you back to kind of some of those decisions that we had to make, and then kind of explain the story. So we had two boys at the time. They were 4 and 6 years of age. And my oldest son, Jack, bless his heart, he's about one of the most adventurous, high energy individuals you'd ever meet. Okay. He probably takes after his dad. Okay. A lot of tenacity, right? And after we had our second child, Mitch, we had decided even before he was born that we were going to have my wife's tubes tied, because we were done, okay? And my oldest son, Jack, he was almost a 12-pound baby, so we had a C-section with him, and the doctors advised just go with C-section for number 2, right?
Yeah.
And since we're already there, we can do the procedure, to basically make it so that you can't have children again, right? So we made that decision. We took that decision into our own hands at the time and said, you know what, our quiver is full. We're not having any more. We've always wanted to have a round number of children, so we're going with 2. That's it, right? So made that decision, and at the time it seemed like the right decision for our family. But a few years after Mitch was born, we felt this just emptiness in our heart. Okay, we felt like we weren't done yet, and we had a desire to have more children. So my wife and I spent a lot of money, flew out to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we met with a doctor to reverse what had been done previously, to fix, what we had done previously, and it didn't work. So we went several months and a couple of years, trying, not able to have another child, okay? And so we at that time decided, you know what? I feel like our heart is really opening up right now to adoption. Okay. So we started the exploratory phase and reached out to, an adoption agency to learn more. It's basically on a Saturday morning, y'all get together with a bunch of other potential adoptive families and you learn about adoption, right? So we learned about it, we thought about it, we prayed about it, contemplated what that might look like. And then we decided, you know what? This is where we feel that God's leading us, is to pursue adoption. However, at the time we had to make some decisions, right? Are we going to adopt domestically? Are we going to adopt internationally? Are we going to adopt a snowflake baby, right? I don't have time to unpack what that looks like, but look up snowflake babies. Yes, you can adopt embryos as well. And so we had a lot of decisions that we had to make in that regard. But because our previous experience of international missions, which, by the way, I should explain, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was also on those Mongolia missions trips with me, okay, and the group. We had a heart for that culture, those people, the Asian community as a whole. And so we made the decision to adopt internationally from China, in addition to the fact that we had 2 other families that we know that also did the same thing just prior to us. So we kind of had these built-in mentors that would really mentor us through the process, who were actually friends of ours, right? So we made the decision to adopt internationally from China, and we wanted to adopt a girl or a daughter, okay? That's what we set out to do. We went through the process. It was about a 6-month process for the agency to evaluate us and our family to make sure that we're going to be good enough parents, right, to go through the process. So we end up on this list of like 35 other families that are also pursuing adoption in China. And we just had to wait until it was our number. Our number was pulled, right? So that process took 3 or 4 months. And I'll never forget, my wife calls me and she says, Germ, the agency just called me and they have our daughter. She's almost in tears, okay? They have our daughter. It's our turn. We're up now. We have 24 hours to make a decision whether or not we're going to go through the process. I was on a football field somewhere with my older son, okay? She says, but Germ, she says, our daughter or our potential future daughter has a twin brother, and they don't divide twins. And so we had to make a decision to not just pursue adopting one, but adopting 2. And we had 24 hours to make that decision. Okay. And so we felt like God was laying it on our hearts. I have 2 boys. I can take on another one.
There you go.
And so we had to make that decision, and God kind of opened up the door for us to pursue 2. And so at the time, the family of 4 traveled over to Beijing, China, and then further on to Wuhan, China. And we came back as a family of 6.
That's awesome. That's phenomenal. How did the conversations with your 2 boys you had already, right? So they were 4 and 6. So, the 4-year-old's probably just going to go with the flow, but the 6-year-old already kind of starting to feel, what the family is. So how do those conversations go with the boys?
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we've been very open, with our children. We've been very open with our adopted kids, Jet and Juliana, about their story. Because everybody lost something. Okay. Everybody lost something. What I mean by that is my 2 biological boys, they lost, more one-on-one time with dad, right? Now they have to share dad with 4, not just 2, right? They lost something. They lost maybe their, more independence or more privacy or more attention, right? They lost something. My wife and I, we lost some of the same things. I tell people all the time, if you want to learn to be more not selfish or unselfish, just have more kids.
Yeah, right? No kidding, right?
The more kids you have, the less selfish you can be, because it's no longer about you, it's more about them, and that whole divide and conquer. But, we were also very open with Jet and Juliana as well. We don't know what their story is. Their parents, they lost something here too. They lost them, right? We don't know what the circumstances were around why they were unable to care for them, right? We don't know that story. So we grieve. We're grieving today for that loss of that parent, biological parent relationship that maybe they could have had, at one point. And we don't have the answers, and we probably never will, right? But the amazing thing about our God and our Creator and our Maker is, man, does He have the ability to weave families together in all kinds of different ways. Just look no further than the way that He weaved together families in the Bible over time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's the international side I haven't really thought about much, adopting internationally, but I may have to give it another thought, and we'll talk offline maybe about that. But is you're kind of building out, this is at the same time that you were finishing up now this fix and flip business, because you were kind of like, hey, like I can't do all of this at the same time. So started doing passive investing and all of that. What did your life kind of look like with now bringing in these kids? You're back into your sales job. You have let go of the extra thing, and you're kind of like, I don't know. It seems to me almost thrown to the wolves at this point. They're like, your whole life just changed immediately because you now have these twins hanging out in the house. How did your relationship with your wife continue? What sort of things did you guys have to do to make sure that you guys stayed strong throughout all of this? Because that's a lot of change, smacking you guys in the face. Yes, it was basically all asked for, but just because you asked for the change doesn't mean it makes it easier. It just means that you asked for it, right? So how did the relationship with your wife kind of continue on with that? What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And if I was to sum up that, I would say intentionality. We oftentimes talk about being intentional, with our kids, being intentional, with sharing our faith. But the same rule and principle applies, to the relationship that you have with your wife. And one thing that we always made, we made a decision early on as we were dating that once we started to have children, we weren't going to stop dating, right? Just last night, in fact, my wife and I went out on a date together, right? Because the kids were in youth group, right? And so we always try to make sure that we at least have, one night a week where we can just get together and hang out with each other, get caught up, on the week, talk through each one of the kids and maybe some struggles and some joys that we're having with them. And so I would say that one of the cornerstones, to my wife and I, not just in our individual relationships with God, but also our intentionality and making sure that we are carving out and setting aside time, even daily in some cases, right? But at least once a week where we can get together for an hour or two, hang out, really digest what's been happening in each other's lives and some different things that, we can be lifting each other up for and praying for each other. So that's really been, kind of the cornerstone, I would say, to my wife and I, is just being intentional with, having those, moments or time, of deep connection with one another.
No, I love that. The intentionality side is something I foot stomp to people all the time, because it's one of those, if you just start floating through life will float past you. Like the things in life that you really should be focusing on will float right past you, or you'll just drift apart. Like they may not be floating past you. You're going down the same river, but they're completely on the other riverbank, and you've kind of lost that. So you got to get back together. So being intentional about that is absolutely important. Speaking of the intentionality, I want to kind of shift a little bit to the focus on the kids that you have, right? I mean, you've already talked about, sporting, sports, all the stuff. How do you guys communicate faith inside of your family? How do you, instill that? Obviously, every child, once they leave the house, has to make their own decision on whether or not they're going to go. Right now, you drop them off at youth group, but later on, they're going to have to choose to go to church, right? Well, really, you have a 19-year-old. Yeah, you have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. They're basically at the point they're having to choose anyways, right? What they're doing. So how do you kind of institute your faith inside of the house? How do you kind of lead your family on that front?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Obviously, there's, living out your life, and setting that example and being an action taker, living out your faith every day. I think I think this quote is probably used way too often, but, St. Francis of Assisi says, sometimes we don't just use words, right, to preach Christ. It has to be through our actions, right? When necessary, use words kind of a thing, but it's really the action of your life, the story that you're telling, is really what's leading people to Christ. So, I would say thankfully with our two older boys, now 19 and 17, we've really encouraged them to not live on the coattails of your parents' faith in God, but it has to be an individual direct relationship that you have with God and not a relationship with God through me, right? And so we've stressed that, very early on. It's also one of the core reasons why we decided to homeschool, is because I wanted to be in a position, and we wanted to be in a position where, we're indoctrinating our own children, right? Versus, leaving that up to, the public school system, to do. I think the public school system has a place and a time, but thankfully we were in a position to be able to homeschool our own children. So thankfully with my older boys now, they're still actively involved in church. In fact, my son, who graduated from high school last year, is now the youth pastor's, what would you say, the youth pastor's kind of right-hand man, like his mentor, his apprentice, kind of a thing. And so he's still actively involved on Wednesday evenings. My older teenage boys, while they now drive themselves to church, we still see them coming to church to worship with us and being part of the young, I would say it's like the young entrepreneurs, the young college age, groups that they get involved with. So thankfully the church that we are attenders at and are members at, thankfully they have groups kind of designed for people of different ages that can get involved and do life with other people that are at that same stage in life and be able to connect with those individuals, as well. My wife and I had that same, pleasure when we were, in college, being part of a college Sunday school class ministry. And then when people were done with college, that group kind of transformed into a young marrieds group, and then that transformed into a young parents kind of group, where we all have, young kids. And so that, that's how you do life together, right? That's the amazing thing about being a part of a church community and the body of Christ, is that, we're all doing life together. And when you do life together with people, you also have a tendency to be transparent with one another, because it's not easy, right? And I think that, unfortunately, I think that's why a lot of people don't get connected to church, is because either they don't feel like becoming vulnerable or transparent, or maybe, that deflects them away from the church in some shape or form. It's amazing what God can do in the heart and the mind of somebody if you're willing to share your burdens with one another.
For sure. Yeah. And that's part of the fellowship inside of the church, is being able to do that with each other and being able to share with each other and not have judgment of each other, but just being there to support and help. And I think that's where those small groups really come into a huge place, because you're living life together. We call them life groups at our church instead of just small groups, which previous churches, I'm not, I don't care one way or another what you call them, but I love the fact that they're called life groups, because you're doing life together a little bit more. And we're in a larger church, so this helps just kind of bring in that community a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, where you're living life together. You're seeing the kids, you're seeing the families. There was, when we were doing them here at the house, we'd had probably like 15 kids running around the house while, we put on something in the playroom, some sort of a Bible lesson in the playroom, so the parents could focus on what we were trying to focus on. But man, oh man, we all just got to live life together and have fun and help each other out. And it was an absolute blessing.
Yeah, that's cool. We had a similar, story in our own home, where we had a small group that was meeting in our house. And originally it started with like 4 kids. By the time, several years later, there was 40 kids. It's like people just stopped having kids. And it got to this point where we weren't just hiring, one babysitter, to kind of watch the kids in the basement, but we had like 3 or 4 of them. Right. And so the group kind of outgrew the house that we were in.
For sure. Definitely understand that. So I want to go into the investing side that you're doing now. So you've got an education company that you're teaching folks about the investment. You wrote a book on it, and now this is kind of your full-time gig is helping teach people how to do all of this stuff. Are your kids involved in all of this? What does the teaching of your kids of investing look like? Now that this is your full-time venture, what does that look like for your kids on teaching them all of this?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. So they were definitely involved even early on when we were fixing and flipping houses. So my boys at the time, we didn't have the twins at that moment, but my boys were definitely a part of it. They walked through a lot of, very dilapidated, houses. I tell people, that unfortunately at the time, my boys were exposed to, meth labs and marijuana farms and stripper poles and all kinds of different things, right? It's an ugly business in some cases, right? And so, thankful to have pivoted away from that type of an environment, but they were absolutely involved in that entrepreneurial process. They were also actively involved in a coffee roasting business that we decided to start with the intentionality of teaching our children about small business entrepreneur ownership. So they had the experience to deal with, anything from sales to accounting to operations to, managing the books on the back end, right, to production, to customer service, right? So we started a coffee roasting business called Stir Sticks Coffee. That was a fairly successful business. We were able to get our product in a lot of different retail stores. They went door to door, with the flyer thing and posted signs all over the neighborhood, that sort of thing. So that was a really good experience for all 4 of my children to really learn about the potential of becoming a future small business owner or an entrepreneur. And so my older boys basically poured gas on that effort. My son, a couple of years ago, started an outdoor services company. It was originally called Dyer Brothers Outdoor Services. He transferred it into Superior Lawn Care and Snow Removal. My boys in the kind of the 2024 calendar year, I think collectively they probably made $200,000 as a complete side hustle, while also going to school full time, being a part of the church community, as well, plus all the different family vacations that we take. They did fairly well in that space. And so they've really continued to expand upon, that entrepreneurship, endeavor, which also, again, kind of leads into me starting up Starting Point Capital. We've always kind of had this, entrepreneurial itch, and I'd say I've definitely scratched it, as well as my, extended family has really scratched that itch in the last few years. again, Starting Point Capital was something that we really just fell into, right? We fell into it because so many people that we're surrounded with, both personally and professionally, they wanted to learn more about, getting involved in real estate. The challenge with most individuals is they're just like me. They don't have the time, right? They don't have the bandwidth in order to get educated. They don't have that knowledge, base. They don't have the time. Of course, there's fears and risks and all those kind of things, with getting involved. But most people do have a genuine desire to diversify outside of what I call Wall Street and into Main Street, right? And when it comes to investing in Main Street, you really have two options. Option number one is you scratch your own entrepreneurial itch. You start up a business. You buy into the playbook of a franchise. You buy an existing business, right? Or you invest in those types of things as a passive investor, right? Where you're just investing your capital into the project or the business plan as opposed to being the active owner operator, right? And so what Starting Point Capital is really designed to do is to teach people about the latter, right? People that want to continue to crush their, W-2. They want to continue to maybe climb the corporate ladder, right? They know that they lack the bandwidth in their lives to be able to learn, about small business ownership. They don't, maybe have the time to create a side hustle, form of income, right? But they want to get diversified outside of Wall Street. And so we're really allowing them to be able to partner, with my wife and I on these types of alternative investments that we're already deploying our own capital into as well, right? And we're really intentional about the types of investments that we make as well, because we want the investments themselves to not just make an impact from a returns perspective, but we want them to make a life impact as well. So most of the investments that we make are in that kind of workforce housing, B-class type renter property, where we're partnering with other operators and investing in their investment opportunities, where they're also supporting their own tenants through organizations like Apartment Life, right? Where Apartment Life will carve out a unit in their property in order to have a missions couple living in that unit to create community within the neighborhood, hosting things like Vacation Bible School, running a shuttle over to a local area church in that community, right? Really trying to invest in operators that aren't just trying to give us a good risk-adjusted return, but they're investing in people to make an impact. And so for us, that's really what I call impact giving.
This is in line with one of these things I've been talking a little bit more about recently. A few years ago, I heard, I'm going to forget his name right now. He's a social media influencer, big investor, used to play
Grant
baseball.
Cardone?
Oh, no, not that guy. Christian dude, not Scientologist. Grant Cardone being the Scientologist side of the house. But Ryan Pineda, there we go. So he had talked about the Bible talking about being unequally yoked in marriage, and he applied that. And I don't think it's just about your marriage, about your business as well. And that was something I had to really when I heard him say that, it was like a kick in the shin, because there were already some feelings that I was having in various different ways. And I was like, I just don't feel as aligned in that front with some of my business partners, whether it was in real estate, whether it was in other businesses, whatever it was just not quite there. And what you're saying right now helps, it brought a smile to my face quite literally, where I was like, this is exactly why when you are aligned, even biblically, with your business partners, you could say, yeah, I don't mind if I lose some of that return because we're setting up this bus schedule, or because we did this giveaway, or because we helped these families in this way, and I'm by no means saying that folks who aren't Christians can't be generous. But what I am saying is that when you are together with other Christians who want to be generous and are wanting to make more than just a return of capital on this, then that makes a huge difference in how you operate the business. When you're communicating with all these investors, you're communicating with these people, you're communicating with the operators, how are you kind of deciding which operators are actually going to be in line with where you're trying to go, that are going to be in line with what your investor base is looking at, to make sure that you guys are moving forward together?
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful question. And, people always talk about, when it comes to investing, right, you're trying to reduce your risk exposure from operations to execution of the business plan to market risks. And people always talk about do your homework, right? In the space of investing, it's called due diligence, right? Yes. And so it's really difficult for people to do proper due diligence on any investment, whether it's Wall Street or Main Street, purely looking at a pitch deck. I have never once seen a bad pitch deck. Okay. However, I have been involved in investments before that the pitch deck looked great, but the investment failed. Right. And so I'm thankful to have really made a pivot several years ago in terms of doing due diligence, not necessarily on the operator or the deal, okay, but really doing due diligence on the heart, okay? And I'm also thankful to say that I have a lot of other investors that think the same way. They don't care as much about the pitch deck. They don't care as much about executing the business plan. They don't care as much about timing the market cycle, right? They care more about the operators and the people that are actually going to be responsible for carrying out the mission. They care more about their heart, okay, than anything else. And so I really think it's important that, the investing community doesn't look at that lightly, okay? Mm-hmm. When you choose to deploy capital into a stock, or you choose to deploy your capital into a small business or a passive real estate investment or whatever it is, okay, I would encourage you to stop, take a step back, and really drill into and dial down into the heart of the operator, the people that are actually making those decisions on a day-by-day basis. We talk about words like integrity and trust, right? And transparency and impact investing. All those kind of things are things that I care more about than I would care about, outsizing my return, because it helps me to feel, more comfortable that the investment dollars that I'm deploying are not just going towards increasing Jeremy's, nest egg, but they're going towards actually making a meaningful life impact with other people.
For sure. And I love that that's part of the process. And by no means do I want somebody to hear that and think to themselves, okay, as long as they're a nice person and they have a great heart, I'm going to invest with them. No, they still have to know what the heck they're doing. So, that's one of those things that I've suckered myself into that before, which is why I'm saying it is, man, this person's just amazing. They got such a good heart, but they don't know crap about business. So if they don't know crap about business, I probably shouldn't invest with them. You know what I mean? So it's still a great heart. Let's let them be on the passive side and not the active side. But no, I absolutely love that. Is that all implemented inside of your education course as well? Or is that more of like, if you guys do calls or anything, I don't know what the community kind of looks like for you guys, but do you separate that in the course as well? Like these are the types of people you want to invest with. This is what you should be looking out for in their heart and what they're looking for.
Yeah, 100%. And, obviously I unpack that a lot more, in my book, The Fundamental Investor. But, when we're regularly engaging, with the investor community, we talk about the risks, right? We're very transparent that there's no such thing as a risk-free investment, right? I talk about those 3 risk factors of operations, execution, and market risk, right? And so what does this operator do, or what is this investment doing, right, to help mitigate those potential risk factors? But beyond all of that, again, we really look into the heart, of the operator as well.
I love it. Yeah. What was the name of the book again?
The Fundamental Investor. You can find it on Amazon for $26. We give 100% away, or donate 100% of the income from the sale of that book. Thankfully, I was very blessed back in November, not this past year, but the previous November is when we launched it, November of 20. It was the #1 book on Amazon in the category of real estate investing for about 6 weeks.
Very good. Awesome. Well, definitely folks need to jump in there and grab it. I will do my best to grab it as well when we get done with this. So your kids, I was curious, you said that they made about $200,000 in that 1 year doing that stuff. Did you have them put that into some investments that you were already kind of looking at?
Yeah, they reinvested a lot of that into equipment, right? Okay. So there was a lot of that, but also all 4 of my children have invested, or partnered with us, in our investments as well, on the real estate side. So they've gotten their, diversification and their exposure, to both Wall Street and Main Street type investment strategies.
Fantastic. Do you actively employ your kids at all inside of the businesses, or is it more just helping them learn about investing?
Yeah, we don't employ the kids in the business. My wife is absolutely an integral part, of the business and supporting it. She probably allocates, 10 to 15 hours per week towards, starting point capital and continuing to grow the business. But the kids now have their own businesses, right? And so they don't really need to work in our business because they're working to support their own entrepreneurial endeavors.
So that's one of those things that I wish, I look back, and I shouldn't say I wish. I look back and go, man, I thought there was only one opportunity for me, and that was to join the military, which is what I did. I just joined the military. I did a lot of years running around this world doing crazy things for the military. Ended up getting married, realized that, like, my wife's military as well. She just retired. But it's one of those that I look at and go, I didn't even know people saved money until I met my wife. I didn't know investments were a thing until I met my wife. I had such a late start getting into probably my, early to mid 30s, probably mid 30s before I started actually investing and doing something. And I was like, this is a whole new world that was opened up for me. And now I've got 3 kids that I get to teach about investing and buying businesses and buying real estate and doing all this stuff. Is just such a blessing to be able to say, hey, these are the options that are out there. And you're super encouraging in that and going, man, my 19-year-old is already doing my 19 and 17-year-old already doing their business ventures. And I was like, this is what I love, So because of that, I want to rewind a little bit to this coffee roasting thing and how you kind of, like, literally the nuts and bolts of putting this stuff together with the kids. Like, what you already kind of told what they were involved in, but I want to know, like, literally, how were they involved in these things? How did they go door to door? What were they doing on the accounting side? So that if anything, if nobody else takes anything from this, I'm going to steal what you say and give it to my kids so that I can do a better job of teaching and guiding them inside of the business world.
Yeah, well, Stir Sticks came about really in 2 parts. Number one, was really my wife and I's absolute love for a good cup of coffee. Second to that, my children at the time, they were, I don't know, maybe 12 and 14. They wanted to start a business early on. Of course, they did the lemonade stand thing, right? Mm-hmm. They came to me with a few different ideas of different businesses that they wanted to start, most of them which were fairly seasonal, in nature. And I told my kids at the time, Jack and Mitch, I said, hey guys, I don't know what the statistic is, but probably 90% of adults drink coffee, and they drink it every single day. And you have these big companies out there like, Caribou Coffee and Starbucks. I mean, these guys are raking in billions of dollars a year selling, $4.50 cups of coffee. So that was really kind of the eye-opening experience for the kids to say, wow, maybe there's an opportunity here. So, of course, I went online and found a commercial coffee roaster. I think we spent like $10,000 on this thing. My dad is involved in HVAC, and when you hook up a commercial coffee roaster, it's like basically hooking up a furnace, right? Mm-hmm. And so he came in and kind of volunteered some time and some hours, to get the thing hooked up in the garage. And it was capable of roasting 6 pounds of green coffee, at a time. I bought a bunch of books so that I could learn how to actually roast coffee and make sure that it actually tasted good, that kind of thing. We decided to go with a dark roast, a medium roast, a light roast. So we had different product, sets. I hired a logo design person to put together the logo. The kids, of course, were all part of that, experience. We set up a website on Shopify. They were a part of that, experience as well. And then we just decided to start going to market, right? And going to market, literally meant, calling up grandparents and aunts and uncles and letting them know what we're doing, going door to door, kind of the door knocker thing, right? Yeah. Going into retail businesses where we could actually have our product, on their shelf, kind of a thing. So the kids were absolutely involved in all of that. And then once a month we'd get together and talk about the financials, right? How many, bags did we sell this month? What's the profit margin on selling a 12-ounce bag of Brazil, right? What's the profit margin on selling a sample pack 4-ounce of Guatemalan, right? Mm-hmm. And how much in income did the company take in this month? And what is that appropriation of commissions or incentives now that each child is going to be paid for their contributions to the business, right? So we set up a performance-based pay type of structure.
Definitely a salesman.
So the kids were getting paid based upon, the effort that they gave. The challenge for me, by the way, just for the record, is the business really kept growing, right? Mm-hmm. Having a lot of success. In fact, during COVID, we actually had a competitive coffee roasting business that did not have an online presence that reached out to us, kind of in desperation to say, hey, you guys have a great online presence. Would you mind if we had our clients go to your website to purchase our product? Okay. So we actually were in a position where we could help support another struggling business, during COVID, continue to sell their product, because at the time their business was not allowed to be open, right?
Yeah.
But we were able to, help support them and assist them, in that way. So again, allowing our kids to be able to be a part of that experience. The challenge for me is I was the master coffee roaster, okay? And again, I was in that pivotal decision where it's like, okay, I really want to help my kids continue to grow this business, but you're not putting a 12-year-old behind a coffee roaster, okay? It's just too dangerous, right? And so I was finding myself having to carve out 3-4 hours in an evening once a week or on the weekend to roast, 50, 60 pounds of coffee at a time. And for me, the juice now wasn't worth the squeeze anymore. I was finding myself almost kind of getting too frustrated with how successful the business was growing. But it was also at that same time where my boys, they were ready to launch into the next thing. They were ready to transfer the skills, the skill set, the knowledge base. They were ready to transfer that into something different. And that's where Dyer Brothers Outdoor Services was born. And that then put me into the position to say, you know what? This coffee roasting business is done. We're, getting rid of the website. We're selling the coffee roaster, and that chapter closed, but a new one opened.
I love it. I love that the kids were even looking at this going, you know what? I think I'm ready to do my own thing, not this thing that Dad helped me start, but I want to focus on this new thing. My kids are still, my oldest is 11. So I've got 11, a 7, and a 2.5, almost 3-year-old. So it's one of those that they want to be involved, excuse me, but they're still not quite ready to just kind of do their own thing. So like we bought him a 3D printer for Christmas this year. So my son's doing all the study that he can to learn how to do these different things and design things on the 3D printer to be able to set up maybe his own Shopify business or whatever it is. But they're just trying to kind of figure out their own way on how to do things. But I love that you brought it in there. You made it real. You put your actual hard work into making this happen for the kids, and I love it. It brings a smile to my face when I hear, especially dads talking about this sort of thing and being involved. Now, speaking of you talked about having kind of two father figures. You had your stepfather and your actual dad. Your dad is a GC, so you got to be in business with him for a little while. What sort of, if any, did entrepreneurial spirit did they put inside of you, or what was that kind of like for you watching them? What tools did you take from your parents to kind of put into this entrepreneurial spirit that you all of a sudden had?
Yeah, that's a great question. Neither one of my parents or my stepfather are entrepreneurial at all. Okay. My dad actually made the decision to step off the W-2 bandwagon probably 5 or 6 years before I decided to start scratching that entrepreneurial itch. And so I saw him take that big risk, right? And say, you know what, I'm done with my corporate sales job. He was in data storage sales, selling big $1 million mainframe computers to, some of the biggest companies in the world. And he did that for, 3 decades, right? And then he decided to pivot to small business entrepreneurial ownership, get his general contractor's license, do small, interior renovations, single family homes, obviously support the fix and flip side. So I saw him make that decision, right? And how that changed, his demeanor, his life, his being able to be more in control of his own time, right? Those sorts of things, being able to be involved more, with his kids' lives and his grandkids' life, right? And so he really kind of was the one who almost really inspired me, right? To say, if my dad could take that risk, and by the way, he took that risk in his mid-50s, okay? Yeah. I just happened to take that risk when I was in my early 40s. So I took the risk a little bit earlier than him, but me having seen him take that risk, really gave me a lot of confidence that, what, if my dad can take that pivot and move away from, a life of really working for corporate America to a life of now, becoming your own small business entrepreneur, that really gave me kind of some of that confidence to say, you know what, I can do that same thing too.
I love it, which I'm sure, transitioned into your kids being able to see it and saying, hey, I can take that risk too. I don't need, especially when they look at the world today and go, college ain't what it used to be. These secure, 30-year jobs with a pension aren't what they used to be. But man, oh man, this gives me the freedom, the enjoyment, yeah, sure. There's some extra stress involved. There's some extra things involved, and as with anything, but when you're your own boss, you get to kind of pull that in, and worst case scenario, you end up going and getting a job anyways, right? So might as well take the risk. What sort of conversations do you have with your kids now as they're building these businesses, as they're kind of figuring out their way in what entrepreneurship looks like? What sort of guidance and mentoring? And I'll ask this while also saying that one of the things that I like to talk to people about is like the transition from you're kind of the CEO of all these little businesses, right? So like the parents are like the CEO and COO of all these their kids, which are their businesses, right? And if you think about it in that way, like they're a startup when they're a baby, and like it takes a lot of effort, a lot of work. You're not getting a whole lot of return. Like you're just exhausted. It's like starting a business. And then as they work through, like the goal would be that when they're out of the house, you're now just on the board of advisors. You no longer have to be a CEO. You don't have to direct the operations. You don't have to make sure that like you're just on the board of advisors. If they need something, they give you a call. So you're kind of at that stage, especially with your two older ones, where you're basically on the board. So what sort of advice are you giving on that board? What sort of questions are they bringing to you and your wife about, hey, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about that? How does that relationship look now?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you highlighted that, because I am absolutely not the CEO of either of their respective businesses. And just to clarify, both my boys don't support the same business. They both have their own separate respective businesses. My oldest son, Jack, he's more involved in commercial type outdoor services, lawn landscape, snow removal, whereas my younger son, Mitch, who's 17, is more involved in the residential side, right? So they don't play in each other's sandbox. They can refer business back and forth to each other, which is obviously a good thing. But they have two separate businesses. I am not the CEO of either one of those companies. They are involved, but to your point, I'm that advisor you talked about, but I'm also that shoulder to cry on guy too, because they're making a lot of mistakes, and that's okay, right? And that's the thing that I tell them all the time is like, you're gonna have a lot of adversity, okay? You're gonna have a guy that doesn't show up to work when you've got a big job, right? You're gonna have a vehicle, a piece of equipment that's gonna fail on the job, okay? You're going to struggle month over month sometimes during times where we're in between seasons from a cash flow perspective, right? Like you're going to face adversity with customers, right? That aren't going to be pleased or satisfied with your level of attention to detail, right? Like you're going to have to divorce clients from time to time, right? And separate your relationship with them. You're going to have customers that aren't going to exchange pleasantries with you over the phone, text, or email. Like you're going to be involved in tough decisions like that. And they both already have, right? And so it's really my position now is to really encourage that failure, right? Embrace failure, because as we fail, as we struggle, as we experience times of adversity in the business, and as we put in those reps, you almost build up like a tolerance or a callus, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that. And so I think sometimes kids and even adults have this tendency to say, you know what? The reason why I'm not taking action in the thing is because I'm afraid to fail, right? This fear of failure is a real thing, both in children and in adults. So, and I'm really encouraging not just my own kids, but people that are your and my age, don't be afraid to fail, because it's through the failure that we learn and we get better. And what ends up happening in most cases is that sometimes people don't realize this, but if you give up after failing 2 or 3 times, what you don't realize, if you just fail 10 times, you're going to break through that barrier. And on the other side of that is or could be a massive amount of success.
For sure. Yeah, that's one of those things that we try to teach our kids. It doesn't always work. Not every kid wants to accept that fail often, but fail forward is what I tend to tell the kids. But man, oh man, does failure hurt. Like they just don't like it at all. Can you give an example of maybe one of those times where one of your sons came to you and said, hey, like I failed miserably at it, whether it was a job, whether it was on a client, whatever it was, where you were able to kind of walk them off the ledge a little bit, say, hey, come over here a little bit. Like it's okay. This is how we can correct this. This is how we can work through this as a solid example for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So my son last summer had a customer that was just completely unsatisfied with any level of work that my son performed at a residential property. Every single time he would go out and perform the service, he'd get a text message, an email, or a voicemail the next day saying what a poor job he did, right? Well, after having gone through that for several weeks, it was pretty clear to me that the issue wasn't in the level of work. The issue is he didn't want to pay my son. Okay. And so it was more of a financial thing than anything. And so really what we learned, through that lesson and that experience is that sometimes it's better to know who your customer is not than it is to know who your customer is, right? And so, yeah, it's hard. You're going to lose, 60, $70 a week in reoccurring revenue from that customer. But look at all of the extra time that you're having to spend going back out again, to that customer site. You're burning through additional operating expenses, going out and having to redo or rework, the service that you had previously provided. It's probably time for you to part ways with that customer and reallocate that time, that effort, and that energy into acquiring a better customer experience with somebody that maybe isn't going to be as quite as needy, I would say, as that individual.
How did your son take that? What were his thoughts on it? Did he not want to lose that revenue, or what was his perspective on it?
Yeah, I would say for the first couple of weeks, it was like, we got to find a way to fix this, right? We got to try to find a way to please the client, customer first, right? And so it got a few weeks into it where it was like something else is going on here, because you're delivering on the expectation, but now you're not getting paid for it, right? And so maybe it's time for us to rethink, whether or not it makes sense for you to continue supporting that client. And let's craft an email response or a text message response to that customer, basically saying, hey, really appreciate having supported your needs. We really appreciate servicing you, but we're going to have to, pivot in a different direction, because operationally and financially speaking, our engagement with you is no longer working.
Yeah, and I think that's a good lesson learned at an early age. Excuse me, at an early age, for him to kind of go, okay, this is how I can break up with a client. And I tell my employees all the time, like, I'm not one of those the customer is always right kind of guys, because the customer is not always right. Oftentimes the customer is wrong, and that's okay. I shouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes the customer is wrong. If you're doing everything right and you're doing everything to the expectation supposed to happen, and they want to cry and complain and moan about whatever, let's assess. Are we doing something wrong? Let's figure out if we are. Let's figure out if there's something that we can correct. But sometimes you just need to break up and say, no, that's quite all right. I appreciate it. It's been a fun ride, but not really. Thank you very much. See you later. So, I'm trying to, at this point, I just bought a escape room business recently. So all of my employees are like 17 to 20 years old, right? So they're all young. Don't have entrepreneur parents at all. So I'm like trying to throw all these little lessons in here and there, because I don't have teenagers yet. My 11-year-old is wanting to learn all of this stuff, but it doesn't stick quite as much as, for a college kid. But I just keep throwing these things like, hey, these are the things you have to worry about. These are the things you have to think about. And I feel like hopefully it's given me practice for when my kids are that age, that I'll have a whole lot more guidance and help for them to be able to do those things. So good on you on figuring that out. With you and your wife, like, what is you said your wife's very involved in the business side of the house, on the capital side. What sort of conversations do you guys have, the two of you guys, on, hey, this is how we want to grow our family. These are the kind of impacts we want to make with the family. These are the things that we want to push with our kids. How do you guys make sure, I mean, obviously you said your date nights once a week, but true alignment on the direction that you want to bring the kids, and knowing that you guys are both on the same page? What sort of actual practical tools are you guys taking to make that happen?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Obviously, making that decision to pivot to homeschooling, was incredibly important, because now we can kind of, craft and create, what we want that education, journey to look like. but now with our older boys, we're purely in a mentorship mode. And when I say mentorship, it's really, centered around continuing to help, guide and counsel and coach them, on growing their respective businesses. They both have dating relationships. So that's a whole nother, topic of conversation there when, girlfriends are now kind of thrust and thrown into the discussion, obviously making sure, that they're continuing to stay actively involved and part of a ministry, predominantly, through our local church, what that looks like for them, and really encouraging them to, have an active prayer life, get in the word, daily, make sure that the 6 inches between their ears, is functioning, properly. And sometimes that means the consumption of information. Both my boys are very active podcast listeners. And so I think while, you having a podcast and me having a podcast can make a material impact in the life of others, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are not, right?
Yes.
And so really encouraging, them, what's your source of information? Where are you getting that information from? Let's make sure that we're thinking about what you're hearing with a critical ear, but also that you're balancing what that individual is saying with what we know to be the truth, as we know found in the scriptures, right?
Mm-hmm. Very good. What did it look like when they were younger? Let's say, I don't know, maybe an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old boy. And what were the conversations you guys were having then? Well, when did you guys start doing the homeschool?
We started doing homeschool right around the COVID time.
Okay.
My wife has a background in education. She was actually a public school teacher for 3 years after college, just before our oldest son was born. Okay. So kind of that period between college ending and first child is here. She was a public school teacher, so she was a licensed school teacher. And so she had a knack for education. Obviously, it was, part of her schooling, part of her background, part of her experience. And really COVID, specifically in Minnesota, everything was locked down tight, right? And so that experience, having really taken over our kids' education for that 1 year school year, really gave us kind of the wind in the sails that we needed to say, you know what, we could do this, right? And so we made the decision to not send our kids back to public school. We got them all involved in curriculum. We got them involved in a couple of different homeschool co-ops so that they could continue to be a part of that kind of, experience, having other kids in a classroom, type setting and so forth. And that's probably one of the best, decisions that we made. I do have one child that does not go to homeschool right now because he has dysgraphia and he needs some extra special attention that we're not able to give. Dysgraphia is basically like ADHD on steroids, but kids that have dysgraphia, they think at a much higher level than most people. So he's brilliant. He's got a brilliant mind, but because of the dysgraphia, he needs a lot more stimuli in his experience. And it was really becoming very difficult for my wife to be able to homeschool, both him and his daughter because of all the different distractions that were occurring, throughout the day. So we got him involved in a great private school here close to where we live. He goes to school with a couple of other, buddies that live in our neighborhood. So that was a good experience for him at this point.
Yeah, dysgraphia, it kind of sounds like it's having that Ferrari engine behind a rack and pinion steering. It's kind of hard to control where that's going on the road when you put the gas down, but I would imagine that would be rather difficult. But no, my wife kind of looked at me like I was crazy when I said that I wanted to homeschool because, she was still active duty and I'm sitting here running business stuff from home. And I was like, I really think that we should be bringing our kids home and teaching them here. And she was like, well, in the grand scheme of things, you're the one doing it. So good luck. Like, let me know what I can do to help. You're crazy, but go for it. So then we started doing it and then we're on our 3rd year now. Absolutely love it. Does that mean I love every day of it? No, but I do love the fact that we're doing it, and that we get to impact our kids and show them a different side of what the world has to offer and different education and things that they would never, ever experience in regular school. Some of that, thank God, they would that they're not experiencing the things that are in school as well, right? Because it goes both ways. They would be experiencing a whole lot of different things. Because I was a public school kid growing up. My wife was a private school kid growing up. So I always said, oh yeah, we're going to go to public school. My kids are going to go to public school. It prepared me so much for the world. And now I'm looking at the world going, well, that's not what I need. Like, that's not at all what I need, and now I went the complete opposite direction. But I absolutely love doing what we're doing. What was your main curriculum that you guys used? Curious.
A number of different curriculums, and unfortunately, I can't remember all the different names.
Well,
But
great. Thanks.
yeah, because there was four of them, and they're all kind of different ages, different levels, that sort of thing. I don't recall all the different curriculums, but one thing that's unique about, kids is once they get to kind of, that 15, 16 years old, we just started pivoting straight to what's called PSEO, which is basically like you're taking college level courses while you're still in high school, and you're partnering with the local college to do that, right? And so both my older boys, Jack, who's already exited, high school, and Mitch will, follow in kind of the same footsteps. By the time they're done with high school, they can have 2 years of college done at that point,
Yeah.
right? Well, we're not teaching the college courses, right?
Yeah.
We're aligning with the local college, where we live, whether it's in person or online, for them to enroll into. So homeschooling is really impactful when the kids are younger. But once they get into that kind of middle high school level, you're really not homeschooling them anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they're largely at that point, even though they're in high school, they're largely, experiencing college at that, level or layer of their teaching and education.
I love that. And I look forward to those times. Like my wife managed through her private school to do the same thing, get like a year of college in while in high school, which again, I didn't even know college was an option. So the fact that she was doing college in high school obviously gives you an idea between the two of us where the brains kind of go. But I love the flexibility of the homeschool side of the house. I may almost sound like a homeschool evangelist on this podcast from time to time, but I really do think it's like one of the best things you can possibly do is bring your kids home and teach them here and guide them here and give them the right impact, the right level of attention that they should be getting. And I love the fact that I could say, hey, okay, you're in third grade math, but first grade reading, no big deal, right? Or, you're in 10th grade reading and sixth grade math, no big deal. Like my oldest, he's in sixth grade. He's supposed to be in fifth grade, but he's in sixth grade because he started a little early. But yet, his reading comprehension is at like 10th grade. Well, I mean, if he was in regular sixth grade right now, the books he'd be reading, he'd be bored. He would be just kind of looking around and now I get to say, no, whatever book you want, let's go do it. Like you want to read it, let's go. Let's make it happen. And it's so much more enjoyable for me to be able to watch the growth that I can apply one way or another as they're growing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think about, in a public school type setting, you really have structured learning. Mm-hmm. Whereas with homeschool, there is a level or layer of structure to it for sure. But let's be honest, most of it is independent learning, right? And I think, having that experience of being an independent learner, knowing I need to go find the information for myself, does have a lot of, value to it. And it's probably why, our older boys are the way that they are, in the sense that they want to be small business entrepreneurs, is because they know they can take a chance or they can bet on themselves, right? And I think a lot of that really comes out of having a homeschool type setting where you structure your own day. Your day is not structured, right? Most education can get done in 90 minutes or less.
Yeah.
In a homeschool type setting. And then what do you fill the rest of your time with, right? And a lot of homeschoolers, especially when they get into kind of the junior high or middle school type years, a lot of it is self-paced, self-learning, right? They have to take on that role of responsibility of being accountable to themselves and making sure that they're progressing through the curriculum at the pace in which they feel comfortable with, obviously with mom and dad's support there and our encouragement there. But really, it's up to them, to really find, success in it and making sure that they're, checking the required boxes along the way. And that, I think, gives kids a lot of a sense of joy, I guess, mm-hmm. or a sense of accountability to know that they can then transfer, that kind of a mindset, into something else in the future when they do maybe decide to scratch that entrepreneurial itch and start up their own business. They already have the confidence because they gained that confidence throughout their homeschool education.
Yeah, for sure. And they got not only confidence, but independence on figuring a lot of that out, and which I think is way better on being able to do that. It's funny because I've got a couple homeschool kids that work for me. Because I put out in a couple of the homeschool groups that's what I'm looking to hire this great for college students, because they can bring their college work in there, and when the business isn't busy, they can do their college work. And it is awesome to look at these homeschool kids, because it's not like homeschool kids like when you and I were in school. Those were like the stereotypical homeschool kids, where it was like, man, I remember a couple of them would come into public school and high school, and all of a sudden they saw what the quote unquote real world was, and they were woefully unprepared for what was on the outside. But these kids now with the homeschool are so much more prepared, and it's like, man, oh man, they're so much more articulate. They're able to communicate well. I mean, of course there are the outliers, but they seem to be more like outliers now and not like the core. But I think I was watching something recently. I mean, it could have been a Facebook video for all I know, but it was talking about all the how many homeschool families there were, and now there are like 5 million homeschool families in the country, which is like astronomically grown over the years. And I think COVID was one of those slaps in the face for a lot of people. Like, wait a minute, my kids are doing what at school? Like, I'm sorry, what? Like, this is not like, they're not even teaching. What is happening? And so it kind of opened a lot of eyes. But I love that. I love being able to communicate more with homeschool dads, and especially because, well, that's me. So is there anything else? Like, let's talk a little bit more about the community. What is it that if somebody's hearing this and they're like, man, I like this, the idea of learning a little bit more about the passive investing side. What is it that you offer? What is it that, how should they reach out to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're really sourcing, best in class operators. We're sourcing, risk adjusted, type investments, which primarily centers around multifamily apartment communities. Okay. So we're really looking for investments that are catered to a workforce housing demographic, which is the largest demographic of people in this country. Housing continues to become more and more unaffordable, right? We see that in the headline news. And so we're really becoming, as a nation, we're becoming a renter's nation, right? I think I heard it said once from somebody, you will own nothing and you will be happy, right? Well, we're going in that direction, and we have been, quite frankly, for decades now. And so we're primarily targeting investments that are multifamily apartment communities that were built in the 1980s, 1990s that we can fix and flip. If that sounds familiar, I was doing that on the single family side, door by door, right? Now we're essentially doing the exact same thing, but we're fixing and flipping entire apartment communities, okay? Apartment communities that maybe have 200 to 400 doors, built in the 80s, 90s, where our team that's vertically integrated can come in, fully renovate the interior units, increase those rents to what the local market can support, which increases the net operating income, which produces the types of returns that our investors are expecting to receive.
So are you looking for both investors and operators all the time, or do you guys kind of have your fill on operators and or investors?
Yeah, I would say because I've been in this business for a while now, I've got my fill on operators, right? I've invested with a lot of different operators. In fact, I've had many operators on my podcast. It's kind of a thorough due diligence process because I've been in this space. I know the difference between a solid best-in-class operator and an operator that's two men in a truck trying to syndicate an apartment building, right?
Yeah.
So I've kind of navigated more towards those operators that are vertically integrated when it comes to property management, construction management. Everything is largely in-house, where they control, that timeline from acquisition, all the way through the time in which it makes sense to sell, the property, right? But we're primarily focused on that value add, right? Where we can get in, renovate the interior units, bring it up to market, and then ultimately sell that property in 2 to 5 years. So these are not long-term holds. And we're really giving investors that option to diversify outside of Wall Street into Main Street, but not actively have to be involved in the day-to-day management, of the business. And they get consistent cash flow because these investments pay out monthly, distributions. They get equity in the project, which means when we sell the deal at the end, they get their pro rata share of equity profit, at the end. Plus, real estate is very tax advantaged, right? Through the power of depreciation and cost segregation and bonus depreciation, right? So all those things really help make it a very tax advantaged investment. I, for one, have never paid a single dollar in capital gains taxes on any of my real estate investments ever, because I always have enough passive loss depreciation accumulated every year to completely negate any of the potential tax consequences with the income that I'm receiving, on these investments.
For sure. Yeah. I was been in the same boat for a long time. I think that this past year, maybe the 1 year, but I did buy a business, so that's going to help out a little bit. But man, oh man, it's been a little while since I bought some real estate, but it has held over for a long time, the depreciation side of the house. So it's been nice. But Jeremy, it has been awesome to get to know you, chat a little bit, understand kind of who you are and where you come from. If folks are hearing this and they want to be a passive investor, they want to hear more about it, what's the best way for folks to be able to reach out to you?
Yeah, great question. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. You can check me out there. You can head over to our website, startingpointcapital.com. Again, that's startingpointcapital.com, or find Jeremy Dyer on LinkedIn. Jeremy, again, thank you very much. Everybody listening, thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate every one of you that listen to the podcast. If you find this useful, share it with somebody who you think will also find it useful. Or reach out to Jeremy if there's anything he could do to serve or support you in your investing or parental guidance life. So thank you again, everybody listening. Thank you again, Jeremy, and we will see everybody on the next show.
Thank you so much for listening to the BizDad Podcast. We hope you found some value in your time here with us, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share so you and your friends won't miss our upcoming episodes. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Rumble, where we continue these discussions and share more valuable content. Be the dad you know you need to be and run your business in a way you're proud to share with your kids. Keep crushing it.